Welcome to another episode of Bitcash Breakthrough, your gateway to digital wealth. Please welcome Luke Stokes. He's on the board of the Foundation for Inner Wallet Operability, who brings a rich background in blockchain technology and voluntary systems of governance. Since early teen, Luke has been involved in the Bitcoin community, as well as Hive and EOS. With a computer science degree from UPenn, Luke founded FoxyCart, a shopping cart software company, which he helped build and bootstrap over a decade. Now residing in Puerto Rico with his family, Luke dedicates his efforts to using blockchain technology to foster a world that aligns with his values on voluntarism, philosophy, and consciousness. Welcome, Luke.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jim.
I always start by asking people how they got started with crypto or Bitcoin.
Yeah, I got started basically looking at money. It was a combination of running FoxyCart as an e-commerce platform. I was very familiar with the payment gateways, merchant account providers, like that whole in 2007, building that company. And I was also looking into the Federal Reserve System, fiat currency, and that whole like Ponzi scam. And so I was like seeing the credit card system, the acquirers, payment gateways, like all the different middlemen there, and just how that whole system of payments was messed up. And then the underlying system of currency itself being all messed up. And I'd heard about Bitcoin in 2011, 2012. And I was like, it's fake internet money that you mine on your computer. That's just, but it wasn't until the beginning, actually probably the end of 2012, but the beginning of 2013 was when I really looked into it. And I bought my first Bitcoin. I spent like $50. I got 2.5 Bitcoin. They were $20 a piece. And the reason I finally really spent time to look into it, one of the things I remember was seeing the anonymous active put a Bitcoin address on their Twitter handle. And I was like, what the heck? They're crazy, but they're not stupid, right? If these guys actually are using Bitcoin for payments, maybe it's a thing. And so I started looking into it. And that just went down a deep rabbit hole. All of 2013, I was just super excited about it, kept telling people about it. There's a Bitcoin wiki entry for FoxyCart we integrated with BitPay back in 2013. So all of our stores could accept Bitcoin as payment, which obviously was like way too early. But just that whole experience, like in getting involved and just seeing the price go up from there, telling a lot of my friends about it, just learning about technology and realizing that eventually over time that this is a tool for global consensus, like nonviolent, peaceful global consensus. Is a money system that actually works. It isn't being inflated away. It isn't funding wars, and just has so many characteristics to it that I really got excited about. Yeah, I've been in the space off and on since then. And 2018, I sold my half of my business back to my business partner so I could focus full-time on consulting and advising in the space. Doing that, as you mentioned, I was involved in some EOS projects. We were one of the block producers that helped launch the network back in the day. Been involved a lot with Steam and Hive. And more recently, starting in 2018, 2019, I was consulting for the company, eventually the software that became the FIO protocol, FIO, Foundation for Inner Wallet Operability. And it's human readable names for crypto sending and receiving. And I've been doing that since we launched the net in 2020. That's what I've been up to. And the last couple of years, I've been taking a break, just hanging out with my 3 kids and my wife, really enjoying Puerto Rico, doing a lot of wing foiling, and it's been pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, that must be, that must be really fun. And it's nice to have a break. Yeah, being in crypto for so many years as well. It could get a little bit tedious sometimes, but let's break down just the history. So for Bitcoin, you said you were a little skeptical in earlier 2012. What got you over the hump of saying, hey, this is a real thing? And was it that anonymous kind of hacker group?
It was enough to just get me to look into it. And then it was just hours and days and days and hours and days on Bitcoin Talk. I just went through the forums. I just spent so much time. Back then there was no real good information. So there'd just be these gigantic 20 pages of tons and tons of posts trying to talk about what the heck is this Bitcoin thing. And I ate it up, man. I spent so much time on the Bitcoin Talk forums trying to understand what's going on. What is this? And I started, like I said, buying a little bit, sending it to different wallets, learning how it works, trying different on-ramps. Back then, it was like Dwala and Mt. Gox and Bitstamp and all these different things. It was crazy. I remember I had some Bitcoin on ChangeTip. I probably is a lot of money now. Like when they closed off, I never got all my Bitcoin on Change. But just like using the different tools and being so excited about this full self-sovereign control of your own value. I just got really excited about it.
Yeah, that's great. And so the voluntarism and that, you were probably following that before, and you were talking about how you studied the Federal Reserve. What kind of was that part?
It all came together, actually. I think I was interested in Bitcoin. I was also interested in those philosophies. And so I went to Anarchapulco. I went to Porcupine Freedom Festival. Like I was like really interested in universally preferred behavior and non-aggression principle, and just thinking about how can we do governance differently. And I think a big part of that was seeing the Bitcoin network essentially self-govern without violence and without threats of violence. I remember I think it was May of 2013, when the Bitcoin network hard worked awake, when it happened, I watched it happen. They had rolled out a update to the Qt reference client that allowed for a larger block. And so 2 different versions of the Bitcoin network existed at the same time. And it was a big deal. And I remember staying up that night till like 1, 2 in the morning in the IRC chat, actually, internet relay chat, like watching this independent group of people from all over the world running all their own businesses, doing their own mining, doing their own thing, somehow coordinate and come together to solve the problem. The next morning it was solved. And I remember telling my wife at the time, I'm like, this is going to change the world, because there's no government, there's no multinational corporation, there's nothing I had experienced that could coordinate and solve problems that quickly. And each individual actor was basically looking out for their own, and that included shutting down their businesses, shutting down their mining rigs, like doing things that were difficult, but those selfish interests in alignment with the interests of the entire network to get everything up and running again. And to see that happen and see that coordination, that was it. Once I saw that, I'm like, this is amazing. And I remember I did a talk that year at a conference, a local conference in Nashville, camp conference actually. And the title of the talk was, Bitcoin is more disruptive than the internet. And people were like, what the frick is Bitcoin? It's going to be more disruptive than the thing it's built on. And I gave that talk and had a crowd of 20, 30 people around me, because Bitcoin was doing a big run. And so it was in the news a bit. And so that was really, really fun and exciting as well, just helping educate people. I've since done that ever since. I did a thing a while back called Understanding Block.com, did some videos there. And I recently, actually, a few months ago, I did a talk here in Puerto Rico at a conference, recorded that, put that there, and I've had a lot of good feedback from that as well. Just trying to educate people on what Bitcoin is and what money is, really. I think in all the years that I've been in the space, one of the number one reasons people don't understand Bitcoin is they don't actually understand money. They don't know how money works. They don't know how banks work. They don't really understand where their purchasing power comes from. And they just leave their house, go work a job, come home, and there's money, and they just don't think about it. So like educating people about how money works, as I've found an interesting way to educate them about why Bitcoin matters.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so from Bitcoin, and we could talk about that maybe first. So Bitcoin, now you have the big Bitcoin ETF, and it's becoming institutionalized. Do you have any opinions on where it is now compared to many years ago?
Yeah, I think it's actually legitimized in the sense that, like, first you laugh at them, then you them and you join them. They haven't been able to beat Bitcoin. When you have major governments, I was able to go to El Salvador with Brock a while back and experience that. We've been to a couple other countries as well. Like seeing countries adopt Bitcoin, seeing BlackRock and gigantic investment firms adopt Bitcoin. To me, it was one of the things we thought about. What happens if all these big financial people start using their like boomer bucks, their fake money, and buy up all the Bitcoin? Oh no. And I remember we game theorized this back in 2013 on the forums. And the answer was essentially, most people were like, I don't care. That just makes the price in US through the roof, and I'll never sell. That's what people were saying. Basically, they're like, they could do whatever they want. I'm not going to sell my Bitcoin. And it was just very interesting. Recognize that they can't stop this. There's nothing they can do to stop it. And so that part is pretty exciting. As to the concerns about block wars, seeing all that cash drama, seeing Lightning Network still not quite working as nicely as people want it to, using the idea that it's peer-to-peer digital cash and kind of accepting this narrative of peer-to-peer or digital gold is, I think, a little disappointing. I think the reason why I got involved in a lot of other projects and lost some of that excitement for Bitcoin and Bitcoin only. In 2016, a couple people at the same time one weekend told me about Steam. And I think that's possibly where we met. I'm trying to remember, but I got involved in Steam and was one of the consensus witnesses there when it became Hive. And so I was part of that whole transition, seeing billionaires essentially try to take over a blockchain and seeing the community fight back and get control. I got recruited to be part of EOS, an EOS block producer. And we were trying to build DAC factories. I was really excited about DAOs and DACs as governance models that could work. And I think I've since lost a little bit of my excitement and encouragement about that, because I've just seen so many challenges with just human nature and people voting on stuff and trying to extract value. And I was involved in FIO because I was like, hey, this is way too hard to use. If we want to have billions of users using cryptocurrency, we've got to make the user experience much easier. My big concern was that we were a little bit early, and I still feel that a bit, that not enough people send and receive crypto on a daily basis to actually feel the pain point that human readable addresses like Luke Stokes that FIO provides actually solves. But more recently, like I said, I've been taking a break, but I've also been excited about models. The Morpheus AI is a very interesting model that is pretty recent this year. Their token just went live here in May, and they came up with a model where there's no company, there's no DAO, there's no nonprofit, there's literally no team. There's no team tokens. They did a fair launch, just deployed a white paper and some code, very similar to the Bitcoin launch. And some of the people involved today are pretty amazing people that are recognizing, hey, this is exciting as when Ethereum first started or when Bitcoin first started, because it's solving a problem is really important. As far as we don't want Microsoft or Google like telling us what type of intelligence we can access personally. We don't want centralized companies doing that, just like we don't want governments and banks controlling our finances. This is the new currency of the future, your ability to access compute and access intelligence. So that model has got me excited again. We were talking earlier, I was just this week here at a conference in Puerto Rico, a free AI conference talking about this stuff. And so I'm like excited again because it's another model to explore how humans can cooperate and coordinate. They do it is they're distributing rewards via the smart contracts based on different categories of adding value. And there's really no voting. It's just like a code. It's like someone submits a pull request and whoever maintains that repo makes decisions, and there's different people that can, give feedback. And if somebody doesn't like it, they can fork the repo and convince the community that they're now the maintainer. So it has a very interesting atomic governance approach that I'm pretty excited about. So yeah, I've always been passionate about governance. I think the last year or two, I've focused a lot on consciousness evolution and thinking about what we do to level up people's thinking and awareness. And that way I've found you don't need as many governance tools when you have really some people you're working with, and they're more dealt with their trauma and their shadow work and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of stuff I've been really interested in lately, kind of feeling like the tools aren't necessarily the problem. It seems like the people are the problem. And the more we can help people work on becoming better people, the more we can have better outcomes. So that's my current thinking. It's like a long path from one place to another, but that's where I'm at the moment. And I get to live that out in my own house with my 3 kids and teaching them how to treat each other better, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's another way of looking at things. But let's unpack this, because governance is such a big part of some of the ecosystems and projects you were involved with. And so you go from Bitcoin, which doesn't have any kind of governance, and then let's unpack the history there with, say, EOS DAC and DAOs and these tools, and then kind of Morpheus. We could also end there and just maybe evaluate how that works without any kind of governance system. So
yeah, I think it's interesting. I think we'll say there's no governance. There's always governance. So like for Bitcoin, for example, the repo maintainer of the core reference client of Bitcoin there's a level of governance there, which patches are included, which patches aren't, and drama like that. There's been people that have strongly disagreed, and that's where you had a big fork with people going off to build Bitcoin Cash. Even Ethereum, in a way, is a fork in that there were people that wanted to do things on Bitcoin, that community of people that were in control to define what the Bitcoin protocol was at that moment, and all the different miners who were supporting them, based in full node operators as well. So the full node operators, the miners, the GitHub repo maintainers, the different companies that were involved, all of that plays into the governance model. It just wasn't very transparent, or wasn't, and there was a lot of censorship going on at the time, especially during the block wars. And so I got excited about delegated proof of stake as another approach, and as Steam uses that. And we started thinking about the importance of governance for the smart contracts, because with the DAO hack on Ethereum, we were thinking, well, the problem with smart contracts that can never be updated and might have vulnerabilities. EOS introduced the idea of being able to constantly update your contract. But then we were thinking, well, you need a multi-sig to control those contracts, because you might have a lot of money behind a token or a project. And then we started thinking, how do you determine on the multi-sig? Now we need some kind of DAO governance with voting. And that's where we were building EOS DAC, trying to build DAC tools. And we thought that huge demand from DACs. And there wasn't, which was really surprising at the time. And going from there, I also was just started doing, like I said, in 2018, doing consulting here and there. And I was more interested in kind of setting the whole ecosystem with usability. And that's where I got involved with FIO, which is also an EOS.io fork. So it also has a similar delegated proof of stake governance system. And FIO has been working very well. The model there is we do have a Cayman entity, a nonprofit. There's a board of directors there, which I'm on. And then there's a steering committee that the board of directors puts in place and basically says, but go ahead and try to implement the goals of the protocol and the community. And the steering committee and the token holders, they not only the token holders have influence over who are the validators on the blockchain, but they also can do like a straw poll vote who they would like to be on the board. So it's all kind of circular as far as the governance community. They don't directly elect the board members. That's according to Cayman law. It's the board does all that, but they can recommend based on their voting, and that then influences who comes to the steering committee, which then influences which worker proposals are approved or denied. So it's an interesting process, and it's worked fairly well. We've had some challenges and I've seen this in a lot of DAO environments where you can get some people in that might be causing problems for other people to be effective. And it can be very difficult to get rid of those people or to come to a agreement about getting rid of someone or asking them to leave the DAO. I think in a traditional centralized hierarchy company, the CEO just fires people, and there's a problem with that. But in DAOs, that's a little more challenging, and that's something I've noticed. And so seeing that there's no perfect governance, I got a little, like I said, a little disillusioned with it and started focusing more on what are tools that we can explore for example, and the 20 years of research they've done. What are tools we can do to help in mass, like many millions of people, up their consciousness so that we can have better systems and better communities and better tools? And so I've been focusing on that. And when Morpheus came along and I started hearing about it, I was pretty excited to figure out, okay, I know open source software fairly well. I know there's definitely governance drama in open source software, but for the most part, it generally works. Like you can work with a project. If you really come to head and can't agree, you can just fork the GitHub repo and keep going and do your version of it. It has this right of free association that I find really beautiful, and making that only form of governance, meaning there's no voting, there's no treasury, there's no team. It's just whoever wants to participate gets rewarded directly by the chain for their participation. And the GitHub repos are maintained by people that are following the kind of the guidelines that the community. And so I'm very interested in how, back to almost full circle, the people right now that are involved in Morpheus that I know of are really amazing people, very high quality consciousness, very incredible people, very experienced. They've worked through a lot of stuff in their lives. And so I'm thinking, wow, that's awesome. We have really good people. It seems to work really well. The biggest challenge, I think, with all of these systems is going to bring what you value. That'll be remains to be seen how Morpheus will continue to protect what it values going forward, and also to how that will evolve over time and scales. But I do think there's a lot of examples of open source software that can scale and still get maintained by passionate participants. And I'm really curious with this intersection of blockchain and AI and the narrative about whether or not, like, governments are passing laws now, models you can train and things like that. And again, they're restricting AI in terms of if you've got important business reasons or health reasons or different where you need an answer that's accurate, but you're stuck behind the legal jurisdictional restrictions on what the intelligence can or can't say. That's a very concerning situation. That's basically 1984. It's a George Orwell situation. So I like the idea that they're pushing for the unrestricted intelligence concept and making sure that open source AI is always available to anyone, and you can just run it on your local computer privately without exposing any of your personal information. And it can basically be your personal extension of your intelligence, which I think is awesome. So yeah, that's how it works. Discuss any questions about that whole process, the fair launch, what they did with the token, what they did with getting the code out there. It's all pretty. For example, prior to that, no one had bothered to take all the different open source models and just put a front end on them. Just like you install any software, just install it and use it. No one had done that before. Previously, you had to know the command line, and it was just complicated for everyday users. So now that was like the very first thing they did. And then by 0.06, they added MetaMask support. So now you could just be like, hey, I'd like to stake my Ethereum, and it'll walk you through how to do everything and then pop up your MetaMask when you're ready to sign a transaction. So I, as a passionate advocate for usability improvement, I'm pretty excited about that as well, because everyone knows how to chat. ChatGPT demonstrated with 100 million users right off the bat, people can interact with the chat pretty easy. So this may be the new way that people interact with blockchain, is they just talk to their personal AI who manages their finances. And at the same time, it adds a little bit of control over the AI, because until they can somehow break the laws of physics, they can't guess your private key, they can't access your wallet. So you still get to restrain the AI to only do things that you approve of, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of good synergies with Web3 and AI for sure. And I think with the censorship resistant aspect and the more decentralized aspect where you don't have the tech companies control AI, I think that's fantastic to be able to foster that. Also open source, to be able to fund open source projects. I'm still curious about maybe drilling a little bit deeper on, because governance was such a important. Bitcoin, really, it was a different kind of governance, and then you have more human governance in between. And this one, I'm still trying to figure out how that works, where there is a reward, right, that is given to contributors. And you said there was a maintainer that is able to.
Let me break it down for you. So at the moment, there are 10 different GitHub repos, and there are custodians who manage those different repos, and each one of those repos are involved in different aspects of what is the Morpheus protocol. there are four main categories where the token issuance happens. So much like Bitcoin, there every 10 minutes there's new Bitcoin with the block reward being generated. In a similar way, every single moment there's new Morpheus tokens that are being distributed or being allocated to be distributed. So they're available to be distributed. And the way those four categories, one is capital, if you provide capital to bootstrap the network, which is something I've been doing since February. Code, if you provide open source code that is adding value to the community. Those two are live today. Then the two that aren't live today are compute, where you're providing compute, where you're literally running in a decentralized way, computing power that other people can access to run their AIs. And then the other one is, it's called community, but it's more so not like you're thinking like, oh, I did a meetup or something. It's more about building front ends and interfaces and smart agents, people into using Morpheus. So it's more like provably something that can be demonstrated as real and that can be reported on. So all of those things, what's cool about the model, and I'll just give the capital one as an example. They did one of the most amazing fair launches where basically you take your Ethereum, stake it on Lido or Lido, however it's said, and then you take that staked Ethereum, stake it on the Morpheus contract, and the 2.9% that would normally go to you as rewards goes instead to Morpheus. And then on May 8th, what they did is they launched the chain, the token by taking all those rewards and the Morpheus that had been built up for that time, and they put it in the liquidity right away. There's liquidity on the token, and the people that had been staking and been earning Morpheus got to withdraw their Morpheus, and now there's a price for it. And it started around like 150 or so, and then it went down to 60, and it leveled off. It's been around $80 now. And so basically it's all automatic through smart contracts. So when you go and you've got your stake stuff on Ethereum and you hit claim, it uses the layer 0 over Bridge Arbitrum to basically say this bridge contract is the only contract that can mint tokens on Arbitrum. And the only way that contract will be notified is through the staking contract from Lido. So it's completely done in an autonomous way that nobody has any access to change. And in a similar way, the GitHub repos that are deployed to the contract, hey, here are the weights for the different value that people have provided. And once that pull request is put to the maintainers approve it, then it gets deployed, sent to the smart contract. And then again, all of those Morpheus rewards are happening based on those weights being done in a very autonomous, like no one's involved, no treasuries involved. There's no like pile of tokens that anyone controls. They're all sitting there generated automatically by the system. So it's a pretty ingenious setup. I know Eric Voorhees has been involved and contributed some information. I highly recommend checking out more.org and reading about all what they're doing. So it's something that was so successful. They got over $400 million were staked within the first couple months. It was really amazing that they've standardized what they did. They call it the More 20 standard. And so now any other project that to have actual recurring revenue as a blockchain project and wants to launch their own token can just take this open source code that's been, the contracts have been audited 7 times now, like by some of the best auditors in the industry. So it's super solid, battle tested, hundreds of millions of dollars. And they can basically say, hey, want to support our project, go ahead and stake your Ethereum, take those staked tokens, stake them to our contract, and then that is generating revenue every single day. There's Ethereum coming to that project, and so it's again a recurring revenue model that never existed. It's like a crypto primitive essentially. So that's pretty exciting, and my hope is that the Morpheus community will eventually. I've had 2 different people actually ask me about this. Will integrate, so then you don't have to worry about like big crazy addresses when you're chatting with the AI. You can just be like, hey, send a field request to Luke Stokes for $50, and I could do it for you eventually. That'd be really cool. Looking forward to that kind of stuff. But does that make sense as far as how the decentralized contracts are basically just determining who gets distributed to tokens, and that's all happening through the Arbitrum bridge, meaning there's no person that gets to do that. There's no, it's just basically the bridge itself is issuing the tokens.
Yeah, so I think that's fantastic for the capital contribution side of things. So you can use smart contracts and the yield to go over to the contributors of the project. But where I have questions are just in the human aspect, because let's say community, whether it's building front ends, there's still humans involved in contributing to that. So that's where I think it's in where I see before you had more delegated proof of stake governance and you could vote on things, and that made sense to me, although there were problems in many of
the problem is there were a lot of problems, and this has been one of the biggest challenges of democracy is that as soon as you can vote for basically extracting wealth or value, then the system becomes captured and corrupted. And I've just seen this again and again, where it's if you have the ability to vote against other people's wishes to take money that's the problem. People will generally vote for whatever pays them the most money. And so this is a different model where it's you have to provably demonstrate value, get a pull request and explain the value in a way that everyone agrees before that's ever going to be part of the protocol. And once it is, now you're getting value. So it's a really objective and meritocratic way to say, look, if you trust like we all use open source all the time, we use software all the time, we trust that software and we trust the maintainers of that software, just like the Bitcoin QT wallet. It's like, that is the Bitcoin reference client. And if you trust it, and that's why you trust Bitcoin. If you don't, then you don't, and you don't use it. It's that kind of thing. Or if you're passionate about it, you can actually fork it, and a chain fork. When I say fork in this context, I'm talking about a Git fork. You can take the code, make a copy of it, and basically do what you want to do. And then you can convince the people like, hey, what I'm doing is better. And if they agree with you, you now become the maintainer. And you're the one that's going to decide who gets rewards. I think that kind of governance model that, again, I've seen most of my career in open source is pretty exciting because it's very atomic, it's very transparent, it's censorship resistant. It's got a lot of really good qualities to it, and it's very hard to game the system. If you've got really good people maintaining the code repos and you've got a process where that's all done transparently, it's basically at that point, it's the people that have added all the value to begin with to not screw it up.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that there's similarities there with the Bitcoin maintainers of the code. There is some governance and influence of them over the system. And also, is it such that, so the maintains, well, there's being adversarial. There's also, okay, who are the maintainers and is there self-dealing there? You always want to think about those kinds of things. But so if you do fork, let's say I could imagine if it's Bitcoin, maybe get the hash power towards your particular branch of
and this is what everybody does. It's, hey, I've changed, I can get more money for me and my project, what I think is important. And that's where I think it's really important that the community is constantly doing everything fully transparently, evaluating, was that valuable or not? And part of the way the weights work, and the weights determine how much of the issuance of tokens that go to you as a program, that from what I understand, if you open source code out there and you get granted I think they do snapshots every month about the weights, that if you don't maintain your code, then someone else can take over your project, just like any open source, maintain it themselves and basically take over your weights. So it's just like open source. There's always this self-policing mechanism to say, hey, if you're not maintaining the value that you contributed to in order to gain your weights, then someone else will come along and do it. So that's the basics of it. We'll see. I mean, it's pretty early. We'll see how well it goes. And I think ultimately the final test will be the end user. If they can download a really awesome AI system that's fully Web3 enabled and can connect with their wallets and do cool stuff, and it just works and they're excited about it, then you're going to get developers who are developing open source AI code and smart agents who are getting paid and have a liquidity pool of lots of depth that they can go to. There's not even a need to get on a centralized exchange. It's all on Uniswap right now in Arbitrum, and there's a lot of depth there. And it's pretty exciting to think the market is basically going to decide whether or not this works. And there's no one else to try to get in there and manipulate it. It's look, it works, and people love it and they're going to use it. And that's what it comes down to. So I'm pretty excited about that because that's essentially what Bitcoin did. That's essentially what Tether did. Tether was a crazy idea back in the day, but now it's like one of the largest stable coins out there because it works and people are using it. And there's been a lot of criticism over the years, and yet it's still around and still being used. Now you've got Coinbase doing their own and other people trying to replicate it. But it's, again, I think anything that lets the market decide is a pretty awesome model.
Yeah. And I think relatively speaking, because of so many kind of self-dealing stories I've heard, I actually even interviewed Chango on Chain talking about the Cosmos ecosystem, and she mentioned both Cosmos and Polkadot. It was like, she called it like a treasury raid. Like a treasury
exactly.
raid.
Every single project that has a treasury, because this is just basic game theory and human nature.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a really good job with Theo in terms of maintaining treasury and using it for what the original purpose is, to promote and develop the protocol. But there's always this situation where people are like, why is that person getting paid this? I should get paid this. There's a bunch of politicking and drama. And you're exactly right. Treasury rating, people come in and be like, if I can just, and I remember I was part of the DevX DAO, trying to do Castle Labs. And there's just so many examples of people coming in and just trying to take as much money for themselves as possible. And that's why I kept, the problem is the humans. And so if you just eliminate that temptation, basically, there's no treasury, there's nothing to rate. Now there's just constant issuance. If you want some of it, spin up some miners and you can mine Bitcoin and get some of it. Similar way, you want some of this Morpheus tokens, go add some freaking value that's real and can be on chain and provably in the GitHub. And people go, yeah, that's value. You should get some tokens. So that's where it comes down. So it's neat.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so it goes back to the hardcore Bitcoin maximalist, like, hey, no governance, right? Is there at least no kind of form of human governance?
Yeah, the
because
idea of
yeah,
you don't want to trust corrupt humans, essentially. That's what it comes down to. The whole point of this
Yeah.
technology is no longer have to trust people that don't have our best interests in mind. We can just trust ourselves and say, I know that I'm a good actor. I know what I want to do. And there's no one who I have to ask permission to do what I want to do with this technology. That to me is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So yeah, more is definitely a project that people should look into and contribute and participate in for many different reasons. All right. Hey, so after so many years in crypto, any kind of advice you want to share with people, either about building a crypto business or?
Yeah. So I was thinking, actually, so it's been 11 years now. And I would say there's like evolution of my own perspective on governance, on voluntarism, all this stuff. Like it's taken a couple years, but recognizing that, for example, love hierarchy. They like to know where they fit in the hierarchy. Like serotonin is released when they're like, oh, now I know what my role is. I used to always think decentralize all the things, flatten everything, no hierarchies at all, no authority at all. And I realized it's just not practical. It just doesn't work based on the Homo sapiens species. Like you can't fight what is. And you might have a small group of people that think that way, but generally it's, if you're looking at systems that scale to the planet, we just got to work with what is. And so that's something that over the years, I've been a little less like dogmatic about. Oh, I know what the best model is. It's voluntarism, it's anarchy or whatever like this, in the terms of without archons, without rulers, this is the best way to do things. Now I've just decided the best way to do things is the best way to do things. And that means the least amount of violence, the least amount of maximizing freedom and the ability to liberty and the ability to control and store your own value, all these things. So I'm thinking just bringing a bit of practicality to it. I think as the industry grows up a little bit and recognizing like everything involves trade-offs, everything involves working with what is, figure out what works, what are humans actually going to use, that kind of a deal. And then also too, I would say probably worth mentioning, for the long time, I was really against meme coins. I was like, don't do meme coins. This is so horrible. So many people are getting taken advantage of and losing money. And it was so bad that I was actually hanging out with a friend and we were in the kitchen and just laughing about this token on Solana. And it was so hilarious. We were just laughing for 30 minutes straight, cracking jokes and talking about this coin. And it was like a coin that had been abandoned. And some of us in Puerto Rico were like, hey, let's see if we can do something with this. So I bought my first meme coin. I did. I was there and I had some money on Coinbase and I got some Solana. And I'd never used Solana before either. So I was playing around with Jupiter and Radium. Pretty cool tools. And it got me thinking, like when I looked at Dogecoin and Shiba Inu and these things, like these are multi-billion-dollar payment networks with billions of dollars in liquidity. It's a thing. And regardless of my opinion, it's a thing. And I got to realize, yeah, they're volatile. Yeah, they're crazy. Sometimes they don't work so well because they don't have a solid dev team and utility and all that. But it was the idea that like, I do actually want competing currency. I do want communities launching their own tokens. And I want a ton of that, much more than I want governments and banks controlling currencies. So I changed my views there a little bit and started playing around with that meme coin. Actually, just this past week, a friend of mine was playing around with one called Stoked. Also, I'm like, bro, I have to buy some Stoked. So I played it with the pump.fun for the first time. It's like a fair launch form for Solana for launching tokens, where they take everything that people buy. They have this bonding curve and then it hits a certain amount and then they put all that. So interesting, just seeing people respond to that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I think that was just another example of essentially being less dogmatic, just learning to change your views over time as the data that you're presented with kind of suggests. Like I said, these meme coins are not going away. There are individuals doing what they want to do. It's like I say often, layer zero, the number of human beings think what you're doing is valuable is really the lowest layer security of your blockchain. It's not proof of work, proof of stake, any of that, or delegated proof, just how many people care. And that I think is represented well with the idea of just looking at the number of people participating. So yeah, it's been a change that I think is more recent and new for me. I'm just getting used to it, going, wow, meme coins, wow, that's a lot of craziness there. But again, if people are having fun and people aren't getting greedy, they're not investing more than they're willing to lose, they're not doing things they shouldn't do, then okay, let's have a ton of experiments going on. Let's get to the point where any family or any neighborhood or any community can just launch their own token and have their own money just because they decide they could. I think that's pretty exciting. So I hope to see more of that.
Yeah, and you mentioned some also for the investor audience, some advice, don't invest more than you can afford to lose. Any other advice
Yeah, I
through the
mean,
years that you can give?
I would say that the
Yeah.
first rule number one is still rule number one, not your keys, not your coins. We should all learn this from X, and really should have learned it from Mount Gox. And don't store your crypto on an exchange. A centralized exchange is for exchanging, get in, get out. Decentralized exchanges are great, smart contracts are great, but you got to trust, that the contracts you're interacting with. You got to really understand what messages you're signing. You can sign messages that just empty your wallet, for example. So yeah, just not your keys, not your coins. Really do your research. If you're going to put money into something, understand and trust the platforms you're working with. And again, don't get greedy. It's too good to be true. Probably is. And so these are all things that we talked about more than a decade ago. And now I'm realizing like these messages need to be repeated because there's a lot of new people coming in the industry and they're just not used to this level of volatility or how this all works.
All right. No, that sounds great. And maybe something non-crypto related, since you're now focusing more on family and doing things also even outside of crypto. Any words of advice on that end as well?
Yeah, actually, I would say focus on well-being. Like I mentioned earlier, nonsymbolic.org, there's this 45-day awakening course they've been doing. They've researched thousands of people that basically have the best well-being in the world. And when you think about why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you starting a company? Why are you in crypto? Why are you trying to make money? It's all a proxy to what you really want, which is fundamental well-being, just a deep down sense of okayness all the time. And that's what we want with our families, with our spouses, with our communities. And so I just encourage people to focus on the core thing that really matters, which is your well-being. And then everything else is a way to get to that well-being. And if you travel enough, you'll recognize that there are people with money and people without money. And ultimately, that doesn't completely define their well-being. Their well-being is something that they have the ability to define. And that's through meditation, through researching what's out there, forgiveness, gratitude, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I would encourage people to stay focused on what really matters, your well-being. And in that right framework, then go ahead and see what you're called to do to help improve the world. Like I say, I want to try to where we all want to live in. That's my goal.
Sounds good. That's fantastic, Luke. I really appreciate those kind of words of wisdom. And yeah, really appreciate having you. Hopefully we'll get you back out for another interview, maybe down the road. Give us an update on how things are going and maybe some future crypto project as you maybe get back in.
Thanks very much, Gene. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
All right. Take care. All right. Thanks so much, Luke.
All right. See ya.